Well, thank you very much for sitting down and doing this.
It is my pleasure to be here.
I'm a guy who went to university in the 80s, so like when I see you, I think Geddy Lee, rock star. But I don't know if you ever run into anyone who doesn't know who you are. Like, how do you describe yourself to them?
Well, I don't make it a point of describing myself to anyone, but
But if you're at a dinner party and somebody says, what do you do for a living? Yeah.
Oh, I rarely say I'm a musician. Like, I travel a lot with my wife, and we do these great adventure trips. We're into hiking and biking, and we go to the far corners of the earth. And a lot of times you're in a sort of enforced social circumstance where people don't know who I am. And I never bring up that I'm a musician, and I always say I'm retired or something like that. And it immediately relaxes the environment for me, and of course my wife, who is very easily embarrassed by what I do. And so then we just get on talking about life and things, and that's much better than having to talk about my own life and my accomplishments, whatever they may be, or my obsessions, etc.
Yeah, I mean, incredible accomplishments, though. I mean, widely regarded as one of the great bass players. You've written fantastic music, your band in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That never comes up on those tours?
Well, once in a while I meet a fan that looks at me and goes, "What are you doing here?" And so that's nice. And of course, I'm always happy to meet a fan, and I'm always happy to talk about music with them or whatever project I happen to be obsessed by at the moment. But it's very nice for me to travel incognito, and maybe that explains my attraction to very remote places.
One of the reasons, obviously, we chose to do the interview here, we're near Yonge and Bloor, is that the teenage Geddy Lee saw Led Zeppelin in this space.
Right there.
I mean, that's
Second
incredible to imagine that you, first of all, were here watching one of the greatest, bands at the time and of all time. What kind of impact did that have on you?
Oh, that had a tremendous impact. It was, musicians talk about life-changing moments, and I mean, lots of people talk about life-changing moments, and it's hard to take that expression seriously, but I can say in all honesty that for me and Alex Lifeson, my BFF and my partner in crime for a million years, and also for John Rutsey, who was our drummer at the time, it was a life-changing experience. We sat there in the second row, and Jimmy Page didn't walk on stage, he floated on stage. I'm sure there was a cloud under his feet. And it was such a profoundly intense rock experience. And the rafters were literally shaking, and plaster was literally falling off the ceiling. They really brought the house down. And it was a kind of rock music that we had never really heard or felt in that way. And we went back home as three aspiring young goofs trying to be musicians, and we wanted to be like them. So it changed our whole attitude on how we looked at rock music. It really was that profound.
There's so much that's fascinating in your book, and one of the things for me is kind of the insight into being a developing group of musicians at a time before the internet, obviously, so you couldn't see bands on YouTube, before much music. I mean, you learned professionalism as a band. I kind of was surprised about this from watching Kiss in action.
Yeah, no, we were so green when we crossed the border into the US of A for the first time in 1974, and we were opening shows. We were so wide-eyed, and we barely had professional cases. We were still carrying some of our cabling in empty Coke crates.
Wow.
So we had a lot to learn. And we'd sit night after night at the side of the stage after our short set and watch all the bands. And Kiss was really impressive because not only was the road crew incredibly kind to us, and the guys in the band were very supportive of us, but they were putting on this literally explosive, pyrotechnic display, and they worked so hard every night, and everything had to be choreographed, and everything was split-second timing. And so there was a lot to learn, there was a lot to take in, and you know, it wasn't really about their music for us. We liked some of their songs, of course, and some of them didn't care for, but the way they went about their business was really instructive.
We'll come back to talking about music in a moment, but speaking of your book, let's talk about chapter 3.
Okay.
Which was hard to read. You warned the reader about that. I'm glad I read it. It's a searing account of what your parents, as teenagers, I guess, went through in the death camps, the Nazi death camps. And I've been thinking about it a lot since I read it. What impact do you hope that has on people?
Okay, so when I was nudged to try to do a memoir, there's a lot of reasons that went into it. I never really wanted to do a memoir. Let me just say that. I was always busy and felt there was too much unfinished business ahead of me to spend so much time looking backwards. So how I came to write the book, that's another long story. But one of the things I said to my book agent when I finally did acquiesce and agree to do a memoir was that I had to have a chapter about my parents' experiences, because I felt the personality I am, the way I think, the way I look at the world, was formed, obviously like everyone else, formed by your childhood experiences. But I grew up listening to these stories that affected me very much. And so that was one reason I was insisting on doing a chapter about their lives. Another reason was I wanted to pay homage to my mother, who I was very close with. But the third is that we're living in such dangerous times, and there's so much about that period and what happened to my family that is being forgotten or rewritten. And I felt I just wanted to remind people that this happened, and there were witnesses to it. So for all those reasons, I felt it important to include him in my history.
Yeah, I mean, for all I've heard about the Holocaust, and I visited one of the camps as a tourist, and it was an emotionally wrenching experience. But for all of that, especially sitting here, you're one generation from that. You're here today, as you point out in the book, because your parents, against all odds, managed to survive. It is a reminder of all of that, and it is, what modern day lesson is there for us in that?
Well, that's complicated, as we're living in incendiary and complicated times. And I just think it's important to remember that hate gets you nowhere, and that my people are a minority, even though sometimes we're not treated as a minority for some strange reason. And anti-Semitism is on the rise. And so what is it? A cautionary tale? It's history. History is important, and we can't forget history. So that's it. That's what I tried to sort of get across. And really, the most important thing is there's an accurate, I think, I spent a lot of time researching it, and for the sake of my family, my children, my grandchildren, they can now see and know the story of how lucky we all are to be here.
I don't think of Rush as a political band in the way that some, you two, for example, you think politics with them. But recently, the Rush Instagram account, I don't know if you're in control of it or who runs it, but you obviously have a say in it, made a post about and I think the word sort of monstrous attack by Hamas into Israel, but also again, a quote, innocent souls in Gaza who are also suffering. A lot of people want to stay away from, those kinds of messages, especially from a, corporate entity like a band. You decided to do this.
Well, it was a hurtful, terrible moment in modern history. And speaking out as a human being, that happened to be a Jewish person. Okay, this happened to Jewish people. So both Alex and I felt it was important to express the pain we were feeling watching this, what could be arguably called one of the worst massacres since World War II of the Jewish people. So it's a complicated issue. I am not a person that wants to be a spokesperson for Israeli politics. It's not really about that. It was just a natural crying out of wow, this is a terrible thing we're watching, and it's still terrible to watch.
Do you want to talk about music?
Yes, please.
You describe yourself, I don't know if you use the word perfectionist, but it comes out pretty clearly to me in reading the book that you are a perfectionist, even to a fault, I think you would admit, as you listen to the mixes and remixes of your album. It sounds like a painful process to be working with Geddy Lee as you try to get the perfect sound. Did you ever get the perfect sound? Like, is there do you sit down now at this stage in your life, and is there a track or an album you can listen to and think, you know what, like we nailed it?
Thankfully, I do have moments like that. They're not all pain and regret listening to the old music. Some of them are like, oh, cringy. But yeah, in the writing of this book, I set myself a task. And the task was inspired by Neil. And in Neil's last weeks, on his way to his, what he called his Bubba Cave, his sort of fortress of solitude, where he went every day and, you know, hung out with his cars and wrote and visited friends in his little office.
And I'll just jump in and say that Neil, your drummer, who has recently passed away, the new member of the group who joined only, I don't know, 40 years ago, supposed to, but that's the Neil you're talking about.
That's Neil Peart, yeah. And so a friend of his, Juan, would take him to his little fortress of solitude every day. And he decided that he wanted to listen to all of the records we had made together. You know, I guess in that sense he was reviewing his life and his life's work. And so on a number of times that we visited him in that final year, he expressed his feeling and his pride about how working together, and he wanted Alex and I to know that he was proud. So when I was writing this memoir after he had passed away, I remembered that, and my co-writer, Daniel Richler, was always pushing me for more this, more that, which is his job. So I decided I was going to do the same, and I started listening to every album one at a time and writing down my reactions. You know, you see these reaction videos on YouTube all the time. So this was Geddy Lee doing a reaction video to his own work, you know, 45 years of his own work. And it was very interesting. Some of the songs that I thought were crap were suddenly sounding so good and accomplished. I said, how did we know how to do that when we were only 22 or 23 or 24? And then, of course, there are the obvious songs that make you just go, oh, what was I thinking?
Well, what, like what?
Oh, I don't know.
You don't have to.
I mean, there's so many. But, you know, not every song I have participated in writing is a masterwork, you know. But I was most proud of the last album. And I think, you know, you're always happiest with your last work. But it's now been quite a few years. You know, that record was finished in 2012. And so a dozen years later, listening to it, it really stood up to me, and I was very proud of it. And so that's one example of, and I think Neil sensed that, which is why he retired when he did, was because he didn't feel we could do any better. Now, I might argue that point. I would like to have had the chance, of course, to try another thing, but that's not the way life went. You know, life took its own, as fate does, takes its own master. Right?
We live in a world where somebody watching this who may not be as familiar with your work as people of, let's say, my generation, can just pick up their phone and ask to listen to a track of Rush. Is there a particular album or a track or two that you'd recommend as the entree into Rush?
Oh, God, that's, you know, Rush is such an acquired taste. And, you know, there are things about our band that are a bit coarse. It takes some getting used to. Not a lot of, there are some people that aren't big fans of my voice, for example, as I point out in the book. But I would say if you're going to introduce someone to Rush, it probably moving pictures would be the easiest gateway.
Yeah. One of the nice things about writing a book is that you get to address things that may have annoyed you over the years, and I feel like one of those things is a misunderstanding on the part of some people of the song "Freewill," and you say in the book that fans can feel the way they want about a song, but what bothers you about the reaction of that song is that it has been, you would say, wrongly interpreted as Rush's, I don't know, embrace of Ayn Rand or libertarianism, the whole idea of free will, and that, I think you posted on Instagram in the sort of middle of the worst time of the pandemic, you wearing a mask, and somebody kind of just retorting free will, kind of using your song back to you. So set the record straight on that song.
Yeah, obviously I'm very proud of that song, and when we wrote it, I was behind it, and I still am, and it does have a lot to say and a lot of good things to say about choice and about responsibility. But that's the part that some people tend to ignore, and they use the phrase free will as a license to think and do whatever they feel, no matter how hurtful it is, and without consideration of the other people that they're sharing the planet with. And that was my point, is, of course there's free will. We live in a free society. We can choose how we want to live and how we want to go about our lives, but there is a thing called social responsibility that cannot be ignored, and sometimes people tend to use that phrase as an excuse to ignore social responsibility, and I'm not that kind of person, so that was a bee in my bonnet, and I got it off my chest.
Critics have not always embraced Rush. Maybe critics often haven't embraced Rush. And radio stations sometimes didn't know where your music fit in. There was a time, I think you talk about this in your book, where your own label didn't know where you guys fit in. At what point did you and the other two members of the band feel like you had made it, you had established yourselves, you had achieved the goals that you set out for yourselves?
Well, that's a tough question to answer because of our attitude, feeling that we still had something to learn, somewhere else to go, we could still be better. From a success point of view, I suppose, by the time we got into the late 70s, we were starting to see the fruits of our labor translate into, some sort of lifestyle change where we could pay off our mortgages and start living a little easier. But that was never the goal for us. It was never the driving force behind what we did. Success, of course, everybody wants to be successful, but what does that mean? For us, it was more important to keep improving the show, to keep improving our songwriting, to try to get better as individual players. And Neil was fiercely driven by being a better drummer, and we all were in our own way, and that's one of the things that bonded us. And so, even when we started making some money in the late 70s, first thing we wanted to do was pour it back into the show, and we started adding expensive, audio-visual effects and rear screen projecting and props. And so at what point did I think we were successful? Probably at that time in the late 70s, around Permanent Waves, I think, and Moving Pictures and beyond. I think we knew we had cracked at least one level of we knew we could stick around for a while, put it like that.
Many people describe all three of you as virtuosos, and even, I know nothing about the bass, but when I listen to your music, I think, wow, you're making the bass sound incredible, like it's dancing. It sounds like a much cooler instrument than I realized. So you guys, obviously musically, were highly respected. I get the sense you were very stubborn as a band as well, about this is what we want to do and we're going to do it. I just wonder, all these years later, when you look back, is there, I don't know, regret's too strong a word, but do you ever think to yourself, man, I wish the 30-year-old me had written like a song that was going to be number one? Like, I wish we'd used all our talents and put out a few songs that would be, you know,
well,
big hits.
We didn't know how to do that. You know, we used to joke, and we would look at one of the songs we just finished and say, hey, you know, that could be a hit if somebody else did it. But we were always too quirky. We were always too rhythmically ambitious, too histrionic in our willingness to add a bit of flash or add a bit of complexity. And that's not really conducive to hit singles. So we were just happy with the goals we had set for ourselves, and accepted the fact that we wouldn't know a hit single if we tripped over it.
Yeah, I saw one concert video where people are trying to clap to your music, and I was thinking, man, that is not an easy thing to do. Like, they think they're doing it, and then all of a sudden it's like we're not keeping the beat at all.
I know, that's funny. You know, there was one tour we did with, well, we did a few tours with another Toronto band called Max Webster, and I was good friends with the drummer, Gary McCracken. And he used to stand after their set, he would watch us play. And I think it was during the Hemispheres tour or something like that. And there's one part of Hemispheres which is in 13/8, I think. And he said to me after, I was watching you play that part, man, and you were tapping your foot. Like, how do you do that? How do you even tap your foot through that time change? And I don't know. I think the fun thing about a band like us is that we're not well versed in music theory. Alex was probably the most schooled of the three of us as musicians, but I couldn't read music well. I could struggle through a little bit of it, and nor could Neil. And so we kind of made it up in our own way. We created our own language, and we created these complex pieces kind of by improvising them and then memorizing what we had improvised. So it was a very unorthodox way of putting music together, and very riff-oriented, but oddly enough, it helped us create our own little universe.
You seem to be in a very cool kind of time in your life where you get to sit back and look back, and so what is life like for you now?
Right now, it's very busy.
Yeah.
You know, having written this memoir, which took a couple of years, and the original manuscript was 1,200 pages, and then it
Thank goodness you had an editor.
Thank God. Yeah, my poor editor. So then, of course, was the business about marketing such a work, and so that's kept me quite busy. And I got this other crazy idea during the pandemic. Aside from writing this memoir, I had this idea that was born out of this book that I had written in 2019 called Geddy Lee's Big Beautiful Book of Bass. And in that was a tremendous project for me. I had such great fun collecting basses, learning about them, and helping to put a book together full of beautiful pictures and bring some justice to my instrument, the one that had brought me everything, So part of that book was interviews with some bass players, mostly bass players that either played classic vintage basses or were collectors themselves. But I found that part so fascinating, and especially there was one interview I did with Bill Wyman. And the last thing he wanted to talk about was bass guitars. I mean, he would talk to you about anything. He had written 9 books at that time, I think. He was a butterfly photographer. He was the first musician, he proudly stated, to hit a hat trick at Lord's cricket. Right? He had invented his own metal detector for people with small hands, because, I've got very small hands, Geddy. and he had found relics on his property in the English countryside that are in the British Museum. He's just simply a fascinating person. And so I walked away from that thinking, wow, there's more to bass players than you think. And so I got this crazy idea, and I sat down with my co-writer Daniel and my brother, who's a film producer, Alan, and we came up with this concept along with Sam Dunn, who we'd worked with from Banger Films. We came up with this idea to pitch a show which was kind of an interview show of bass players, but one that sort of starts once they leave the stage and see what kind of lives they have. Anyway, I never thought anyone would be interested in it, but someone was, and the show got bought. And then suddenly, like, shit, now I have to make it. So it was a very interesting experience being in your seat. Me having to take the other role and draw some of these folks out.
How good are you at that?
I was pretty stiff at first, but I kind of got into it towards the end. And each episode unfolded in a very surprising way, and they turned into kind of, it's like part travel, part music, part just honoring the potential of humans.
Nice.
So anyway, so I was very pleased with that, but it kept me very, very busy.
You spent your life honing the art of performance, using pyrotechnics, knowing how to respond to a crowd. You're about to embark on a much different kind of tour about the book, on a stage with a microphone, but an entirely different kind of performance. Are you nervous at all about that?
A little bit. I'm rehearsing, you know. Yeah, it's a different kind of tour, and you know, I haven't been on a tour as such since 2015. So I didn't have a team, you know. I didn't have a crew, and it's not. I'm not playing in it. I'm talking. So very different kind of environment. But you know, I've put my new team together, the people I've been working with on my various projects, and we're having some fun designing it, and I think it'll be good. I think it'll be a nice evening.
Whenever I go to a different country, I look for the first sign of Canada, and usually it's a store like Lululemon. But I was in rural Holland a couple of years ago, and on the train there was a guy with a Rush tour T-shirt on, and which I thought was kind of cool. But I also wondered, you know, if you'd been on the train and seen that, like, would you gone up and tapped him on the shoulder and said hi?
No. Oh, no. I would have probably moved to another car. No, especially, it depends on the context, you know, for me. If it's in the context of work, then of course I would be happy to say hi and talk about anything. But if I'm on holiday, especially if I'm with Nancy, you know, she's very easily embarrassed. So I would just probably slink into another car and let him be, you know, let it be, so to speak.
I haven't been to a Rush concert, but I've now watched a lot of footage, and I've seen you with appliances next to you, like washers, dryers. What? I don't get it. What's up with that?
Okay, so trying to think back what year it was, but my stage gear evolved by devolving. So at one point I had many amplifiers on stage, and as technology developed and solid state technology developed, I realized that I could accomplish my sound with much less gear. But that was a problem, because Alex still had stacks of amps, Neil had this enormous drum kit, and then there was my side of the stage. So I couldn't just put a little solid state device sitting there, and then the road crew would have nothing to hide behind either. So we had some fun scratching our heads and trying to think about what can we put on the stage that will give the crew some cover so they can run back and forth attending to Neil, and balance Alex's still monstrous stack of amplifiers. So the first tour I did it, I still had a couple of speaker cabinets, and I enhanced them with some a shelf that we put together with some blenders and some kitchen appliances.
Yeah, but that's the part I don't get.
Yeah. Well, it was just a kind of a goofy idea. And then the biggest thing was we had a fridge. And the fridge became something that Gump, Neil's drum tech, could hide behind. And so we started exploiting the fridge. And our lighting guy put lights inside the fridge. And so we arranged beforehand that at some point in the show I'll open the fridge door and the supernatural light will emit from it, sort of like the case in that Quentin Tarantino movie. Mm-hmm. But it also became a vehicle for Neil, and he was traveling around America on days off on his motorcycle, and he'd go to a town and he'd find some fridge magnets, and he'd always bring me a fridge magnet on every day off, and so it became a place to put all the fridge magnets. So it sort of became a totem of the tour. You know, it became a receptacle of tour memories. Anyway, so then there came the next tour, and I decided I didn't need any amplification. And during rehearsals, our road manager came across these dryers, these Maytag dryers that were not being used. And he said, you know, what do you think of this? And I said, I like it. You know, you have to remember that we were sort of moving into the world of absurdist comedy. Our sense of humor between us was always a bit outside, a bit absurdist. And so these became sort of inside jokes. And what's amazing is, I think more than any question I've ever been asked in my career, the dryers is the question I'm asked most often. It's quite interesting. Doesn't matter what else we've done. People want to know about the dryers.
Because it's weird.
It's weird, yeah. But it's good weird.
Okay, that's fantastic.